go ahead and let me know if you have any questions from last week. If you ran into any issues, I know I heard from some of you that when you're answering the questions in the test, and then you're getting like feedback, like you only got 10 right, and it was most likely because you were putting the volume or the units in your answer. So just remember, don't do that. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And when we do start and talk about questions 11 and 12. So these questions are asking you to calculate how much fluid to give your patient via peg tubing after they've voided. So every 4 hours, you're kind of just checking to see what type of urine collection there is or how much is accumulated, and then you're just going to do a replacement volume. So I always like to say, like, there's a couple of things that this is indicating to us. It's saying that, so for every 125 milliliters that they actually void out, you want to replace it or put in 40 milliliters. Okay. So that's kind of one way of looking at that, is that's kind of like you're available. I know it seems weird because we're talking about urine and water, but your available is essentially the out over the in. And then your order is what they actually voided, so the actual out. So if I'm setting this up following my ordered over available, where I'm telling you that this is my available here, so 125 milliliters out per 40 milliliters in. So this is my available, this is my quantity, and then my order is the 500 milliliters. Again, that's out. You don't have to write the ins and outs from here on out. I just want to let you know where those numbers are coming from. And so if I'm solving this, I'm going to take my order, which was the actual output, so what the patient actually voided, over my available or my expected output, and then times my replacement volume. And when I do that, I can take 500 times 40, divide by 125, and I should get 160 milliliters as the replacement volume. Now, what makes this tricky is the fact that there's multiple milliliters. Some of you won't get hung up on that like I do. And I used to explain it by saying, you have, your output and your theoretical output and things like that. Let's just keep it simple. Let's use terms you already know. You've already heard ordered or available or desired over have. And I'm just following that methodology. My 500 milliliters over my available 125 milliliters times my quantity, the replacement volume, is 40 milliliters. And I have a formula that kind of fits into this. The other way you could do this, for those of you that are a little bit more savvy with your math, you can do like a ratio. So again, if I start off with what my, output is, and then what the replacement volume is, and then I set that equal to what the actual output is over what we're looking for. Like, you can do some math there. You can kind of figure that out. I would say, like, you don't even have to do like cross multiplying or anything like that. Just like, how do I go from 125 to 5? Right? So what's that number? And then for this, it'd be times 4. You could say, you could just take 500 divided by 125, or 125 times, and then just see how many times it goes in. It doesn't always work out evenly that way, but it probably will for the most part for these types of questions. So whatever you do at the top, you can do to the bottom. So that's just another way to kind of figure this out. And that's where that 160 comes in again. So number 12, I would do the same thing. I would look at, now they just changed the parameters. They changed, for every 100 out, replace with 30. So my available is the 100 milliliters per 30 milliliters. And then it says 400 milliliters is what they actually voided. So again, following my methodology, 400 milliliters over my 100 milliliters times the 30 milliliters. And then I just do 400 over 100 is 4 times 30 would be 120 milliliters. So how they're going to trick you on this question is sometimes they'll say your patient's urine output for the last 4 hours was 500 milliliters. What would the fluid replacement volume be in milliliters if for every 100 milliliters of urine output, you replace with 30 milliliters of water via PEG tubing? So they might rearrange the wording. But what you're looking for is the for every 100 milliliters replace with 30. That's like kind of your available, for lack of a better term, and your quantity. And then your whatever they actually voided, that's your order. Any questions on the fluid replacement? Now, some schools and some of the other campuses will actually, instead of doing the fluid replacement volume question, they'll do a fluid calculation where they're going to give you a bunch of things that the patient is consuming liquid wise. But it'll be in pints and cups and ounces, and they want you to convert it to milliliters. I'll be talking about that for the one of the other campuses reviews next week. But for Allegheny campus, you don't have to worry about that. I would say that is something that's important to know about, though, clinically, because if your patient is consuming a bunch of liquids and they're also on IV, but they're not voiding, that's an indication that their kidneys are not functioning, and so that becomes clinically significant. So something to know about. Okay. All right, so I knew that was one that I did not go over last time, so there might be some things that I'm going to say or go over again as repeat, but I'm going to try and cover a couple new things. We did this one because I remember some of you got 10 ml, but the answer they were looking for was teaspoons. So like if you're answering this question on Blackboard, just write the number 2. You don't need to write the units. Let's look at this question because I don't think we did this one. All right. So question 16 says that you have a patient that's taking V-Silin K suspension, 150 milligrams orally, GID. So I think that's supposed to be a Q. I think it's supposed to be QID for 4 times a day. But since we're only worried about 1 dose, we don't need to worry about the typo there. You would if there was, if they asked you, is this safe to administer? I'd say no, because G is not an abbreviation that we utilize. But it says how many milliliters we administer for 1 dose. So 150 milligrams is the order. Per dose is what we're looking for. So we're going to look at our penicillin VK, and we're seeing that it has a couple of numbers here. This is the strength or the concentration of the medication, but there's 2 pieces of information here. One you need, one you don't. 125 milligrams is important to know because the order is in milligrams. The 200,000 units is an equivalent number for the 125 milligrams, meaning let's say the order was for 450,000 units orally. Then I would use the units as my available versus the milligrams. What you don't want to do is use both these pieces of information. And I know it can be a little confusing, especially the first time you're looking at this. And that's part of learning how to read these labels, is just realize that this is just telling you the same information. It's just that it condensed it. But you're used to taking that, whatever's in a parentheses, and multiplying it. And so if you got that question wrong, that's that's most likely what you did, or you tried to incorporate that 200,000. So when you're solving this, you just take the 150 milligrams, your order, over your available, which is the 125 milligrams, times your quantity, which is 5 ml. And then that's how you would answer that question. And so 150 over 125 times 5 gives you 6 ml. So again, on a paper test, you would write your units, but for your answer here, you would just write 6 in the box. Now, let's say this did say, instead of 150 milligrams, it told you, 250,000 units. That was your order. Then you would ignore the 125 milligrams and then solve for the 250,000 units. Okay, or use the 200,000 units to solve for this. That's all that means. Some of these medications will give you milligrams, micrograms, milligrams, and sometimes it'll give you units and milligrams. Sometimes it'll give you units and micrograms. It really just depends on how the drug is kind of organized. So don't get distracted by that, but it's good that you see it. So say try not to get distracted by that. All right, so here's another one that's just telling you, it gives you the units per milliliter in the on the label. It's telling you that the order is nystatin, 150,000 units. It's an oral swish, so we're putting it in the mouth and we're swishing. And then it's correctly saying QID, so that's 4 times a day. So we want to know how many milliliters are we swishing in the mouth 4 times a day. And then that's where you're just going to take your order, which is the 150,000 units, over your available, which is the 100,000 units, times your 1 ml. And then I think you get 1.5. Yeah, 0.5. So I don't know about you, but 1.5 milliliters, less than half a teaspoon. It's going to be very difficult to swish less than half a teaspoon. So I imagine the order for this particular medication wouldn't work out. You'd probably want it to be at least 30 milliliters when you're actually doing this in a realistic situation. Um, but or it gets added to some sort of liquid or something. I don't know. It tells you it's cherry mint flavored. I don't know, but that's for like, if someone's got oral thrush or some sort of fungal infection in the mouth. This is typically what they're using nystatin for. Yeah, so remember, if you were to get an answer like 1.75 milliliters, then you would want to round your answer to the nearest tenth. If you got an answer of 0.175, then you would want to round your answer to the nearest hundredth because it's a number less than 1. So this is where rounding comes into play when you're doing these types of problems. Again, on the test and even in the practice, you shouldn't worry about that. Like, meaning that the way the questions are asked, it should be like a solid answer, so you won't have to worry about it too much. It's more than next semester when you're doing like drops and you're doing some additional flow rate type questions that you might run into where you have to do a little bit more rounding. All right. So, piece of advice again for a question like this: if there's a cup and they give you a cup and they tell you to mark the cup, you know with certainty that your answer is on the cup. Okay. So it's either gonna be one of those numbers listed on the cup. So 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, 7.5, 5, or 2.5. The answers will be on there. Okay. Now, let's solve this. Now, sometimes, and believe it or not, this is a commonly missed question. And the reason it's commonly missed is because the orders in grams but the available is in milligrams. Okay. So if you try and do, let's just say you're rushing through this and you just and you feeling pretty confident about it and you're just like, I'm just gonna get through this, and you type in your calculator 0.375 divided by 125 times 5, you're going to get an answer of 0.015. Okay. Now you might be tempted to write 15 ml because that number, you're like, oh, 15, and you'd actually be correct if you did that. But the better approach is when you're doing math, and when you're dealing with units, the metric system, you want the units to be the same before you do any kind of calculations. So you could just convert this. Either you just say, oh, I'm going to move my decimal point 3 to the right, because that's what you would do. And then you would have 375 milligrams. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you could take your 370 or your 0.375 grams and then do a conversion where you're converting grams to milligrams, and that's 1/1000, and you're still getting 375 milligrams. Now your order matches your available 125 milligrams times your 5 ml, and then you would get 15 as your answer. So 15 ml would be the correct answer. Okay.
I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, I was thinking that we are going to mark the lines, or do we have to circle the exact number?
So when you're doing the test, like on Blackboard, what you'll see is, do you see how I just dropped a point onto the thing here? So if I wanted to clear that, you're just going to use your mouse, and then if it's me, yeah, I would just mark the line and just put it there on the line. So on Blackboard, yeah, you're going to drop a point onto it because it even tells you, please mark the medicine cup, and what they want you to do is just use your mouse. And then if you put it in the wrong spot, like if I click on it again, it gives me a warning. It says you can't do that. I need to clear it. But I have seen like the way this is keyed. So if you put it on the 15 or on the line, I would say the best bet is on the line. But the window typically for how this is scored will look something like this. It'll be a pretty big block. So as long as your mark is somewhere in the block, you'll get the answer correct. But I would say mark it, like you said, on the line. Good question. So here's another one of those questions where it gives you two pieces of information in the label. So it tells you 125 micrograms, but it also tells you 0.125 milligrams. You need to know that those are both the same strength for the same medication. So it cuts out any kind of need to do any conversion, and you just pay attention to what your order is in. So if your order's in milligrams, then you're going to use the milligram label, which is the same thing as 125 micrograms converted to milligrams. Okay. So you would just ignore that and then just compare milligrams to milligrams. If, let's say, this was in grams, then you would take, your gram amount, and then you would convert that to milligrams. Or if you were feeling extra, like you wanted to do extra work, then convert it to micrograms. But I would just say usually you can just convert the things into the nearest units and you should be okay. Nobody's really asking you to convert grams to milligrams to micrograms. That would just seem bizarre to have to do. And that's per, what are these tablets? Now, it may not always tell you that a tablet is scored, but if it's a tablet, you can at least on the dosage calc test, you can assume that it's scored. But in this particular instance, your answer would just be the 6 tablets. And I know you have a lot of these already figured out. I just want to make sure that I at least cover them all so we're able to look at these and kind of seeing the different things, and maybe the way I explain it or call something out might remind you like, oh yeah, I got the answer right, but I wasn't sure why I got it right, and kind of working through it helps things out. So, and then this is just again converting the 0.8 grams to milligrams. So it'd be 800 milligrams over 400 milligrams. So just be 2 tablets per, or is it tablets? 2, yeah, 2 tablets per day or per dose. Um, Again, with questions like this Aldamet question, you need to pay attention to this thing right here. When it says that 5 ml, make sure you're using the correct quantity. You'll notice that I always put a number, even when I'm doing like ordered over available. I always put a number there. That way I can say, okay, 400 milligrams, 250 milligrams, and then I never just assume that it's 1 ml. I always put whatever number is with that ml. Okay. So it's times 5 ml. So make sure you are doing that correctly. So if I do this, 400 times 5 divided by 250, and I'm going to get 8 ml. What would this answer be if it was, because that was for 8 milliliters per dose. What if this were per day? How many milliliters is this patient receiving of this Aldamet per day? And then
Is
again,
it
you could just,
20? Is it 24?
yeah. And I was gonna say, you could either type it into the chat or just, yeah, you can just say it. That's fine. Yeah. So it would be 24. Good. So TID tells you 3 times a day. So 8 times 3, 24. You got it. I don't think they're going to ask you questions like that, but you should be prepared just in case they do. Good job. This is just another. So on the paper test, they'll have you mark they're called tubex, or what are they calling this? They're calling it just a syringe, but this is probably like a tubex. But you're just gonna, on this one, you're just gonna drop your pointer where you think your answer is. So the order is 75, the available is 50. So I think that ends up being 1.5. So we just drop a pointer there. Something to pay attention to is you want to pay attention to what these little tick marks are, because sometimes they're 1, but sometimes they're in multiples of 2. So like what you want to do is count. So like it says, like here's 1, then this should be 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. So that's how you know, that's how you confirm it. And then 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, 2. So if your answer was, 1.8, then you're going to put your marker at the 1.8. If your answer is 0.7, then you're going to put your mark at the 0.7. So I'm just trying to show you how to read the syringe because it's not always they're not going to give you the same medications. You're going to see some repeat questions or repeat labels, but the numbers oftentimes are different. So like maybe on the test, it's 80 milligrams, or maybe it's 50 milligrams, or maybe it's 90 milligrams. It can be any variation. Now on here, this is also why rounding is important, because let's say it was, I think, let me see what, let me give you an example of this. I don't think they would do this to you, but yeah, so it works out. Yeah, okay, never mind. I'm not finding it because 50 is a half, so it's probably always going to give us a to the 10th answer. But let's say you got something that was weird, like 33, which you wouldn't, and then you divide that by 50, and then you get 0.66, right? You can't do 0.66 on here, but you can do 0.7, and then you can make a mark at the 0.7. So that's where like your answer might differ from where you would mark it on the syringe, because the syringe is ultimately going to dictate what you can. Remember, we can't estimate. We can't put a mark in between two lines and say that we're in like at the 0.65 milliliters. We can't assume that. They don't want you to assume. You put a mark right on the line. So I'm just giving you that. I don't think, like I said, you won't run into that issue. I'm just giving you an answer, or giving you an idea of what to pay attention to when you're answering these things for the test. So here it also tells you to mark the syringe. Okay. So here's the other thing. Now this one does get into more smaller doses, and I'll show you where this comes into play in a little bit. So this tells you 2,500 units divided by 5,000 times 1 ml, and so you would put a drop. That answer is 0.5. But notice it says 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8. So you need to know where 0.5 is on this. So these little tick marks are actually quite small as far as the values, and what they are so your 0.5 is actually right here, okay, which tells you that this is actually 0.45 here. And then we can say that this is 0.41, 0.42, 0.43, 0.44, 0.45. So you could get a 0.4 something answer, or 0.8 something answer. You can get a nice small answer. Go ahead with your question.
What do the numbers on those, like the 601, 318 mean when you select the coordinates?
That's just the coordinates on where it's selected on the image. So,
So it won't show you like the 0.5, it just shows you random.
yeah.
num-
Yeah,
Okay.
because what it is like they have a box around this. And so like wherever I put that, like, so if I put it there, you can see it creates a mark at those coordinates, but then you need to know that it correlates with where you put the mark. So these numbers won't correlate with your answer. That's just the XY coordinates on the box. So like if I try to, I could put it all the way here. I don't know how, so it's let me, I don't know where else I can put it.
Oh, I get it now. You say it like it's the XY coordinates. Okay. Or like
Yep,
it's like the X axis, Y axis. Okay, okay, I
you
get
got
it.
it. Yeah, so don't let that be any, that doesn't tell you anything about your answer. That just tells you where they drop the marker. And then that way, if you were to argue like you're like I put it there at that point, then they can kind of see where that is. But like I said, if I recall correctly on questions like this, like we said it was 0.5. So like the box is like here. Like it's a pretty wide space. As long as it's in that range, you'll get credit for answering that question. But I would say put it right on the line, be as specific as you can.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. Yeah, it's always interesting what people pick up on, because I'll be like, what are you talking about? And I didn't even see the coordinates, and then there it is. So okay. So in this question, this is just another one that is trying to trick you with the um contents of the label. So when we look at we could see the order. I think everyone's starting to pick up on, okay, 45 milligrams, got it. How many milliliters? Okay. And then I see two things. I see 25 milligrams per milliliter, and then I see 250 milligrams. So what this is telling you is that before it gets mixed, it's 250 milligrams of a powder. Then when water is added to it, it creates this solution, this injection that is going to be measured in 25 milligrams per milliliter. So you just ignore the 250 mg. Okay. It's extra piece of information. It's just telling you what the total is. So like if this patient got the whole 10 milliliter vial, 10 times 25 is 250. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. And then you would just take your 45 over the 25 times your 1 ml, and then you would get your answer, which is 45 divided by 25, 1.8 ml. All right. This question is missed a lot. And the reason it's missed a lot, or this type of question is missed a lot, again, is because you get confused, or students get confused by the label. So there's two pieces of information. It tells you it's 10 milligrams per 10 ml. So the whole thing is 10 milligrams in 10 milliliters. And then in parentheses, it'll tell you what that number is reduced, 1 over 1. So 10 over 10 is the same thing as 1 over 1. So it's just repeating the information. It's telling you the full strength concentration, and then it's telling you the reduced strength concentration. And then you can see the orders for 5 milligrams. So you're not using the whole thing, you're only using half. So it's 5 milliliters. All right. Sliding scale. So sometimes it'll show you a picture of for these insulin questions, it'll show you a picture of insulin, and it'll tell you, it'll say something like 100 units per milliliter or something like that. Insulin's always going to be measured in units. Okay. So when we are doing our sliding scale question, we just want to know, can you identify what the blood glucose level is? 200. And then can you find that on the sliding scale? And then do you know to administer 2 units? That's all that this question is asking. There's really not math involved with this. But like I said, sometimes they'll trick you by putting a picture of a insulin label, and it will say like 100 units per milliliter, but insulin's not measured in milliliters, it's measured in units. So that's kind of the exception to where most liquids are going to be measured in milliliters. The exception to that is insulin. So even when patients get on insulin, they're always measuring out how many units to administer, not how many milliliters to administer. And then I think this is the last question. So the other thing is, as I mentioned in the previous question, insulin is always going to be measured in units, always measured in units. Okay. So if it's always being measured in units, you want to choose the syringe that utilizes units. Okay. These are insulin syringes. We do not want to use the ml syringe, because we don't know what the ml is, but even if they gave you a label and even if you could calculate it, you don't use it. Even if you can get an actual number that would actually fit on the syringe, you don't use it. You use the unit syringe for insulin. Okay. So this one just says, select the correct syringe. So it doesn't even tell you where to mark it. But for this, you're just going to add up the total. If you were going to make a mark, 10 units of regular, 20 units of NPH. So you can just make a mark at the 30. But as long as you make a mark on B, syringe B, then you're correct. And you probably noticed that. All right. So that's those. We went through all the questions over the last 2 weeks. Hopefully you've had some time to practice going through this so you can get some feedback to kind of see how you are doing. A lot of students will ask me, can we make more? Can you make more questions? I'm going to tell you, work through the steps because I have some more questions that I'm going to go through starting next week. But it's not the more questions that's going to help you. It's just working through how to solve and set up the questions. And then regardless of what they give you, you'll be able to figure it out because you'll practice the setup. It's all about the setup. Once you get the setup right, regardless of what the question is, regardless of what the medication is, as long as you're reading the directions, marking what they tell you to mark, and answering the question the way they're asking you to answer the question, you're going to get these questions right. And then if you took this test and you got 100%, you should feel really confident and good knowing that you will be fine taking this test at the end of the month. Saying all that, that doesn't mean you should just not practice. Like I said, as a on the low end of the scale of things to kind of do and focus is come to these review sessions. At least kind of make sure that what I'm saying makes sense. Next week, I'll go through the paper version of this test where I'll mark on the paper like the kinds of questions and then how there's different variations of questions and also how some of the questions are the same, how they would be answered on a paper test because you will have a paper test next semester and third semester and fourth semester unless they change that. But you're getting plenty of practice on the computer tests with ATI as well as with this practice set here. So just keep practicing it. Make sure you can answer it. If you want to challenge yourself, change the numbers, change the order, use the same label, and then see if your answer makes sense. And then if you want to run it by me and say, hey, I did question, 14. I used the same label, but I used this order. Would this be the right answer? And then I can check that for you and give you feedback on that if that's something you need. So it's we've been going for about 40 minutes. I'll stop here for today, but if you have any questions, let me know.
I just had a question, but it left my Okay, I'll email you if I remember the question again.
Okay, I'll be here for a few minutes, so if it comes back while you're sitting here, then otherwise, yeah, just shoot me an email.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Would you be able to go over the rules for rounding again? I know that just unit to unit was like not rounding, but then the medication was rounding to the tens place. Could you just go over that real quick for me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so when you go from milligrams to grams or micrograms to milligrams, and that's all the question is asking you, do not round. When you have a number that's greater than 1, you're looking for two significant digits, but you don't have to. You saw that a lot of our answers were like 5 and 6 and 8 and 2 and things like that. But when you have like a milliliter thing and you have a number greater than 1, then you do want two significant digits if there's a decimal answer to it. Meaning, if I have a question and my answer is 1.75, then I'm going to round that answer to 1.8. So I want to look at the number in the hundredths place and decide either round up or don't round. So in this instance, if it's 1.75, round up to 1.8. If it was 1.62, then I would again look at the 2. It's 4 or fewer. So I would not round this number up. I would drop the 2 and leave it at 1.6. So that's numbers greater than 1. The other time that this kind of comes into play is when you're going from pounds to kilograms. Then you would, again, round to the nearest tenth. So if you have somebody that weighs, let's just say 175 pounds, and I divide that by 2.2, as long as it doesn't work out evenly, 175 divided by 2.2, I'm going to get 79.545454 repeating. So I'm going to get 79.54, that's kilograms, and you would round that to 79.5 kilograms. So round your answer. There are some instances where it makes sense just to round that to 80 kilograms, but for the dosage calc test, round to the nearest tenth, because that's what I've been told to tell you, and then now you know. If you have a number less than 1, you're going to round to the nearest hundredth place. So let's say I have an answer like 0.175. I'm going to look at the thousandths place and then decide, do I want to round up or not round? So for this one, I would round to 0.18. If I had 0.123, again, I'm looking at the thousandths place to tell me what to do with the hundredths place. And if that number is 4 or fewer, then I just leave it as 0.12. I don't round it up, don't round it down, and then I keep the 2 significant digits. The big thing is later on, you'll get a question, and when we go through the paper test next week, you'll see an answer of the answer will just end like 0.25 ml, and that's the answer. But students are tempted to round because they're used to rounding, and then they'll put an incorrect answer. So I'm just going to put an X here so you know not to do this. They would put an incorrect answer of 0.3 ml. Okay, you don't want to do that. We don't want to round that. We want those 2 significant numbers there. Saying all that, if your answer is 0.5, that's your answer. You don't need to add an extra number there or put a 0 there or anything like that. That's just what it is. This is more so if you have multiple numbers in your decimal place and what to do with that and that's how you handle rounding.
Okay, so like the greater than 1 and the less than 1, that only applies to like non-unit to unit. Like it's not milligrams to grams. Like we're
Correct.
not rounding to the tens place for those like just unit conversions, right?
Correct. And it's
Okay.
mainly when you're doing like the questions we were working on where it gives you a label and it says like 125 milligrams per 5 ml. And then if you get a big decimal point at the end, like that's where that kind of comes into play. And
Okay.
if you remind me, actually, hold on, let me give you an example of this. That way you can kind of see it in real world, because we actually had a question that this would actually work out for. I'm going to clear my writing so you guys can see like an example of this, because I think it'll be helpful. So like, let's use this as an example. Let's say, I got to toy with some numbers here. Okay, yeah. So let's say instead of 45 milligrams, let's say the order was for 66 milligrams. So what would my answer be for this question, 25, if the order was 66 milligrams? So when you get an answer, just type it into the chat. Good. Yeah, perfect. So you probably saw that you got 2.64, and then you know now to round that to 2.6. All right. What if you get, let me change the number here. Um, okay. It's hard to get this to do anything that I want it to do. Okay. What if my order instead of 66 milligrams was 3.2 milligrams? So if I had 3.2 milligrams as my order, how many ml would I administer? Okay. Yeah. This is where you would see the rounding. So all of you are writing the 0.13. So you get 0.128, and then you would round that to 0.13. So you got it. Yeah. That's what that would look like. If you get a decimal answer, it's just, do you know what to do with it when you are looking at a medication administration? Okay. Versus when you don't round is really just when we're up here and we're just doing like milligrams to grams, micrograms to milligrams. Don't round those straightforward types questions. You don't want to round those. When you go from pounds to kilograms, though, like if we're going into different units, so we're going from American to metric or metric to American, then yeah, you might need to round, and then you would just follow the rounding rules of if it's a number greater than 1, which usually it will be, round to nearest tenth. If it happens to be a number less than 1, round to nearest hundredth. But you don't follow that. Like on this answer, let's just say this was 25 micrograms to milligrams. I would have 0.025 milligrams as my answer. That's my answer. You don't round that. You don't put 0.03. You would keep it as the answer, even if it's some long, ridiculous decimal answer. That's what they want you to do. Good question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I remembered my question.
Okay, go ahead.
Where are we getting these recordings? Like, where do we find the recordings whenever you're
So
done?
yeah, on Blackboard, there's a link to my YouTube channel. And that's where I'm posting them. I think you can also click on the Zoom like meeting and it might pull up the recordings, but I upload them to YouTube as well.
Oh, okay. All right, no problem. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and if you can't find it, just email me and then I will email you the link. But if you just Google or do a YouTube search or even a Google search for like it's like Dr. Rad or the Rad Tutor on
Right,
YouTube,
yeah.
you will find my thing and then it's the newest videos I'm posting.
All right, because I actually found your YouTube way before I actually even started the semester.
Yeah, that's what
Mhm.
and that's why I put it out there because I put it out there mainly for you guys, Allegheny campus. Then it became for CCAC nursing students in general. But I have students reaching out to me from all over, not only the state of Pennsylvania, but all over the country, and even people in other countries that are reaching out because they just happen to come across the content and they're like, "Oh, do you do work for this, or can you help me with that?" And so that's one of the reasons why I put it out there because I knew there was people looking for this type of information to help them out. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. All right. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, like I said, I'll be back here next week at 1:30 on Wednesday, and we'll pick up where we left off. I'll do, like I said, I'll work on the paper copy of the test. I'll make some additional like kind of questions as I kind of move along. I'll add some additional questions. Um, and then if you have more questions, remember we have a couple weeks left before your test, so plenty of time to kind of practice. And I hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome.